Are you watching that? For in Christ Jesus neither circumcision availeth anything, nor uncircumcision, but a new creature. And as many as walk according to this rule, peace be on them. As many as walk in this rule. As many as are not concerned about whether they're circumcised or not, whether they're baptized or not, whether they've obeyed this law or that, whether they have eaten meat or not eaten meat, whether they have eaten fish on Friday or not eaten fish on Friday, none of that matters. For in us must be the new creature, Christ. Now, to the new creature, Christ, what goes into the stomach means nothing. It's what comes out of the mouth. In other words, what emanates from our consciousness. So it has nothing to do with what we eat or when we eat. You see that? It has to do with what our state of consciousness is, and our state of consciousness is determined by whether we are viewing each other as good humans or bad humans, sick humans or well humans, rich humans or poor humans, or whether we are looking right through the appearance to the new creature, Christ, and not trying to reduce their fevers. You see that? Look through the individual to the Christ. Then you will know the middle path, and then you will know the real essence of the message and mission of Christ Jesus. My kingdom is not of this world, so I'm not reducing your fevers. That's of this world. My mission isn't to feed you. That's why I'll only multiply loaves and fishes twice or three times. Not to feed you, to show you the principle of multiplication. See the difference? If he wanted to feed us, then he'd call us every day and multiply loaves and fishes. We just sit there and eat them. If he wanted to heal us, there's any reason why he shouldn't stick around and do it. But no, he says, if I go not away, the Comforter will not come to you. So, the mission and the message of the Master was to reveal the spiritual kingdom, not to patch up the human one, not to separate them from their church that was teaching them wrongly, and not to separate them from Rome that was taxing them wrongly, but to lift them into a new dimension of life, a new consciousness of life in which there is no error. That was well illustrated recently in the experience of a couple, friends of mine, who made a long trip with another couple. Now, these friends of mine had been trained in Christian Science, latterly in the infinite way. The other couple were just very good church people in the ordinary Christian sense. And when they started out on the trip, lo and behold, this other couple had prepared for every emergency and had a great big kit of medicines and prescriptions and one thing and another. And my friends had nothing, hadn't even thought about that phase of it. Well, my friends went through the entire trip without a single discord in harmony or illness. But the others, the very first stop, they got chicken pox, and they didn't have any medicine for chicken pox. That was the one thing that hadn't been covered. Okay? And then air sickness, and then seasickness, and they were plagued on the trip with the food that acted badly on them, and water that didn't agree with them. And here was this other couple who never had anything. Well, now the difference is that these people were in a consciousness where the only law is spirit or God. This couple were in the consciousness of the law of water, the law of food, the law of air motion, the law of water motion, infection, contagion. Do you see that? Well, as long as they were in that consciousness, what could they demonstrate? That consciousness. But the others were in a consciousness of God. And what could they demonstrate? God. Do you see what I'm getting at? Now, we don't leave the world. Oh no, Jesus doesn't pray that we leave the world. that we be left in the world but not of it. You see, and so we go through life entirely unaware of these experiences because they're no part of our consciousness. We had the same thing with another couple who have been students of the Infinite Way, and one of them at least had Christian Science before, but they had to visit some friends one evening who had no trace of metaphysics, and the agony was horrible. Here was this couple unable to sleep nights without pills because of the fear of the atom bomb. And lately their fears were increased because they had just read where this city would probably be the 24th one to get the atom bomb. And 24 isn't very far from the first one. Of course, the first one hasn't happened yet, but can't tell when the 24th one will get out of line. And here were a couple actually losing sleep, actually unable to eat, actually in fear because of an atomic bomb that for all we know doesn't exist. And if it does, may never be used. And if it is used, it can only hit us once. You see the difference in consciousness once you have become the new creature, Christ. Not just a human being who has found a new power to overcome those things, but when you have become the new creature, Christ, in which those things do not appear. Now there again, you get back to a basic thing in the Infinite Way, where we have God not as a great power to overcome error. We don't have God to overcome sin or disease. In the Infinite Way, we merely have God as infinite being. There again is our middle path. We have no purpose for God. We just have God, and that's all. Not to use, not to utilize, not to do anything for us, just to be God. God is. And that led in this New York classwork to an evening or a day when our subject was God is not power. We had quite a shock to some of the people there who just couldn't get along without God as a power. They wanted to feel that God was right there as a power. That was going to protect them. And so we had to have this entire session or two on the subject that if God is infinite, what has God got to be a power to? What has God got to do except be? God just is. But if God was some great power, you'd have to acknowledge some lesser power that God would be a power to or over. And so the subject really was God is not power, and it was quite an evening. Quite. You'll see that when you get those New York tapes. Well, of course, in a sense, you can say that the sunlight, or the sun itself, is a power. But actually, the sun shines. The sun is. The sun is warmth. The sun is light. But if you say, but it's light over darkness, is there any darkness? You say the sun is warm over the cold, but is there any cold? There's no such thing as cold. There's no such thing as darkness. Cold is really the absence of this warmth, just as darkness is an absence of the light. But you couldn't call darkness an entity that can be removed, because in the light there is no darkness. In the warmth there is no cold. Now, when you think then of the sun, you just think of the sun shining and of the warmth and the light of the sun, but you don't think of it as a power going around doing something to the cold or the darkness. And so with God. In God, there is no error. And so you don't think of God then as being around here for the purpose of overcoming something, because in the presence of God there's nothing to overcome. any more than in the presence of the sunshine there's any darkness to overcome. The only time you have darkness to overcome is in the absence of the sun. And the only reason we have discords, inharmonies, sins, sicknesses, death, is because of a sense of the absence of God. No one ever has sin, disease, and death who has a consciousness of God's presence, any more than these people had a fear of the atomic bomb or the others had a fear of disease because of their consciousness of God's presence. These negative things have no appearance, so you can't say that they walked around with God overcoming anything. In the realization of God in them, there wasn't anything to be overcome. And so in that sense, we think of God in the infinite way, not as something that we use, and not as something that overcomes, but just something that is. And in its presence, there is nothing to overcome. I am come that ye might be fulfilled. I am the fulfillment. Then what do we need, fulfillment or I? We need I. The realization of the I is our fulfillment. Do you see that? But that I doesn't go around swashbuckling, putting error out of the way. No, its very presence is the absence of error. The very presence of sunlight is the absence of darkness. The very presence of sun warmth is the absence of cold. But we don't use sun for that purpose. The sun is functioning in that way. Now, the practical application of this is never to think of your studies as a means of overcoming. Never think of your studies or your religious life as removing something or getting rid of something or overcoming something, because you have two powers there. Think of your spiritual life as an attainment of God consciousness, that's all. No one goes out in the sunshine and then tries to get suntan. No, going out in the sunshine is the attaining of the suntan. Do you see that? There's not two separate things, sunshine and suntan. They're the same thing. There's no such thing as sunlight and getting rid of darkness. No. So it is with God. There is no purpose in contacting God for some reason. That was what I brought out last night, and you'll find it in Deep Silence at My Peace. You'll find it in other writings, that we do not go to God for protection. God is the only protection necessary. We don't go to God for money, for supply. God is our supply. We don't go to God for bomb shelters, fortresses, high towers, or rocks. God is the fortress, the high tower, the rock. Do you see that? God is that. But to think of God and something, or God sending something, is equivalent to thinking of God withholding something. It's also equivalent to thinking of God and the existence of something other than God. Now that is why in the demonstration of supply and health, it is written in some of the writings, you cannot demonstrate health and supply, because there is no health and supply. There is only God, and that's all you can demonstrate. But since God is infinite, then God appears as health and supply. So demonstrate God, and you have the health and the supply. Try to demonstrate health and supply separate and apart from God, and you'll have a shadow. Because even if you get physical health, what's to stop tomorrow bringing physical ill health? You see? But demonstrating God, you've lost the consciousness of ill health. Just like in having sunshine, you've lost the consciousness of darkness or cold. And so there too, you have a basic principle of the infinite way that you cannot demonstrate. Supply, home, health, companionship, transportation, vacations. The only demonstration you can make is a realization of God. Then, having demonstrated the presence of I am come that ye might be fulfilled. Now there too, as students who have partaken of this practitioner work, it becomes your function, when called upon for help, first of all, silently to realize, oh, wait a minute, it isn't help or supply, it's the new creature I'm to demonstrate and realize. Christ. Not to voice that to the patient, not to voice that to the young student, not to voice that to members of your family. That is something that you maintain within yourself as part of your consciousness that brings out the thing. Now, if you read Scripture, you'll see that Jesus took his disciples apart and imparted this truth to them. You see that? The disciples didn't go out and tell it. They went out and showed it, healed with it, but they didn't impart it. Jesus imparted it to them. Now, in the same way, we don't voice this to our families or to our patients or to our young students. We realize it within our own being and show it forth in their harmonies until the day comes when they say, well, how is this done? Can you teach me this? Can you show me this? Then begins your experience of imparting to them that you don't demonstrate help or supply or transportation or a seat in the airplane or something of that kind. But what you're demonstrating is the presence of God. And you use discretion in teaching it. You teach it only to those who indicate clearly their sincere desire for it. In other words, don't try just to give it to them. Let them come for it. Let them come twice and 3 times and 10 times. Let the seeking be on their part. Don't ever let the seeking be on your part to give it. Oh, no. No. You're a jeweler sitting up there with a pearl of great price. And you're not going out looking for customers. You've got the one and only jewel there is. And you're going to be very stingy with it. And you're holding out for a big price. And so, when the student comes to you, it isn't necessarily a money price you're holding out for, but you're holding on to that pearl until they deserve it, until they show their ability to respect it and revere it and desire it and want it, until they show their recognition of it and gratitude for it. Then you pour it out as freely as you like. You see that? But until then, no, you're sitting back. You're the master. And you're letting the multitudes come to you. And you're giving them the milk of the Word. Then you're calling your disciples aside and giving them the meat of the Word. You see that? And here and there you may call John aside and give him a little more than meat. You may give him the pearl itself. Okay? The other disciples didn't get that pearl. John got it. So it is with us. We give the milk of the Word. We give all the love, all the truth that the students, the congregation, and the class students can possibly absorb. And then there are those who in some way find their way to the inner circle. And then you start giving them the meat. And then of those, all of those who are not satisfied with meat, they want to become jewel experts, connoisseurs. They want the pearl. So it is. And you find that as you go within, that's how God treats you. As you go to God for demonstrations, for a while you get them. But you don't get God itself. As you continue and say, God, I don't care about this demonstration, I want you. I'll be satisfied with nothing but God itself. And you keep after it. By degrees, you get a little unfoldment here and a little unfoldment. God is so stingy. I don't know why he hoards. You see? And then finally, God gives himself, like in the Song of Solomon. But oh, how you have to struggle till you get there, and beg and plead for that bride and bridegroom. And ultimately, God says, well, you're a tough customer. I can't hold out on you any longer. Here I am. But it's not easy. Few there be that enter. Few there be that enter. And it's not God's fault. It's only that if we could search our consciousness, we'd know it's our fault. We give lip service to the fact that we want God, but actually we're hoping that at the end of the week the business will be a little better, or the health will be a little better. But you see, the sad thing for us is you can't fool God. He knows what's going on in the heart and soul and consciousness, and doesn't yield, you see, until the vessel has become pure. And the degree of purity means the degree in which we can say, I'm not interested in demonstration, I'm interested only in the realization of God. The question was asked to go a little further into the subject that began here in Seattle last January about the stone carved out of the side of a mountain without hands. Of course, that has reference to the Christ consciousness. And it has reference to it in this wise, that the stone, the rock carved out of the side of a mountain without hands, was carved out of the mountain without physical power. Now, how would you carve a stone out of the side of a mountain without using your hands? And the answer is you couldn't. But in the degree that you could sit in the silence, receptive to the presence and power of God, you would soon see that stone being carved out of the side. You'd be a beholder of it happening. Well, instead of the stone carved out of the side of a mountain, let's take a gallstone. And you'd have the same identical thing. It can be removed physically, you see, with hands. But how would we go about doing it without hands? Well, we couldn't do it physically and we couldn't do it mentally. But as we would rise into Christ consciousness and become a beholder of God at work, the grace of God, that stone would be carved out or dissolved or in some way be made to disappear. You see that? It would not have been done physically, it would not have been done mentally. All our healing work is on that basis. Even the healing of a simple headache or indigestion. You don't do anything physically about it. And in the infinite way, you've come to realize you can't even do anything mentally about it. Well, what can you do? You can live in this atmosphere of the Christ. You can realize all power as being vested in the infinite invisible. And then when you sit down to your healing work, you can become very receptive until the Spirit of God begins to work. Then you hear, oh, I'm better. Well, that was a stone carved out of the side of a mountain without hands. That was a physical condition removed without physical or mental help. Not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit. Not by physical might, not by mental power, but by my Spirit. Now, probably all of us, or nearly all of us, have witnessed the healings of people, the removal of stones, the removal of cancers, the removal of tumors. That happened that night in that room there, where a woman had come in that very night in the center where that miracle took place, and when she came in had an enormous tumor. It looked like a baby in the 9th month. And when she went out of there, she had a loose dress hanging on her that night of that experience. There was a stone removed without hands. There was a physical formation removed without physical help or mental help. And it was accomplished by nothing but the spirit in the room. It wasn't even a conscious treatment, because none of us were aware of the fact that she was there with this condition. Maybe somebody sitting around her was, but certainly we weren't on the platform, or any of our workers weren't. And so there, the activity of the Christ in consciousness had removed a physical formation. Difference to make whether it was as hard as stone or only as hard as tumor. Had just as much physical form and appearance, you see. And so our stone carved out of the side of a mountain without hands is any form of demonstration accomplished through the consciousness of truth. Spiritual consciousness of truth. Not the declaration of truth. That may be a first step toward the realization of truth. And that is why we don't omit necessarily the declaration of truth, either orally or silently within ourselves in treatment, but we know that those declarations of truth are not healers. They are merely the stepping stones lifting us to the state of consciousness to where we can apprehend a spiritual idea. In other words, the grace of God. Now, the grace of God is the power that will carve a stone out of the side of a mountain without hands. Now, it goes on to say that that stone carved out of the side of a mountain without hands falls on the 4 temporal kingdoms and destroys them. In other words, then, this state of spiritual consciousness, which is our spiritual rock, falls on the 4 temporal kingdoms, the physical, the mental, moral, financial, and destroys them. It doesn't improve them. It destroys them. There is our new creature again. The spiritual rock doesn't increase people's supply, doesn't increase their health. It destroys the whole of the temporal kingdom. It does not improve it. And that's the essence of the message of the infinite way, as it was with Christ. You hear me speak always of the nature of God and the nature of prayer, and that's only because a few years ago I was speaking of the nature of the Christ. I haven't touched on it lately because it is in the writings. But you must understand that the nature of the Christ is not healing physically or supplying physically. It's a destruction of those kingdoms and the revelation of the new creature, the kingdom of heaven on earth, in which there is no night, in which there is no awareness of sin, disease, or death. Do you see that? To the outside world it appears as healing, and to the outside world we still use those terms. This is a healing ministry, and Jesus' mission was to heal the sick and raise the dead. That is the appearance to the outside world, but actually the mission of the Christ is to destroy the temporal kingdom and to reveal the kingdom of heaven on earth. You read your New Testament again, all 4 of the Gospels, and notice that the activity of the Master was the destruction of the temporal kingdom and the revelation and unfoldment of God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven, right? That's his function. Not improving temporal kingdoms, not increasing the supply of gold in the world. You see? And so when we say, do you own a Cadillac? That's a proof of spirituality. We say, no, the Christ consciousness does not produce a Cadillac. The Christ consciousness reveals the mind that was in Christ Jesus, a spiritual kingdom. And that may appear as the meeting of our human needs at different levels. No reason why it can't appear as a Cadillac. But the appearing of the Cadillac in and of itself is not necessarily the degree of our spirituality, since there are lots of people with Cadillacs who never heard the word or term and have no interest in it. So what we must see is not measure our spiritual development by our material good, but rather by the degree in which we have seen Christ, the Spirit, or the grace of God as the source of our good. There is the degree of our spiritual awareness. While our faith is in more or better matter, we are still increasing the temporal kingdom. When our faith has made a transition to Christ or divine grace as our sufficiency in all things, that is the degree of our spirituality, even though to the outside world it will appear as a demonstration of better humanhood. It is only we ourselves who must not be mesmerized by thinking that the appearances is the demonstration. It is the attainment of the consciousness that is the demonstration, and the appearing of things is the added things. See that?
This is Joel in Hawaii, and adding to this recording, which was made during our practitioner work in Seattle early this month. You note in this recording that the infinite way carries you out of the metaphysical realm of correcting error with truth, out of overcoming discords with truth and love, into the spiritual atmosphere of the kingdom of God, where there is but one power, because there is but one life, one soul, one mind, one spirit, and all of the body of the universe, all of the body of man is really the body of God. God being one, the body is one. The government of the body is one. In this consciousness, you will find that harmony alone exists. As long as we are in the material sense of existence, we will meet good and evil. We will meet harmony and inharmony, accord and discord. As we approach the spiritual atmosphere of life, we find that our own higher sense of existence dispels the illusions of sense. Our own higher realizations of truth become the light dispelling darkness. This, of course, is a step on the way. It is for that reason that we go through the particular stage of consciousness that we call reinterpreting the scene. We are continually being faced with temptation. The temptation to believe in a selfhood apart from God. The temptation to believe in a power apart from God. The temptation to believe in action, law, apart from God. And at that state of consciousness, we learn to reinterpret the scene and become aware of the one power, the one spirit, the one being as real, and thereby resist the temptation to accept the appearance as real. You see, there we have two words to understand, the word temptation and the word appearance. We, in our higher atmosphere, in our higher consciousness of life, know that there is but one life, one mind, one body, one law, one presence, one power. But because we still have not achieved the realization of that higher consciousness, we are faced with temptation. Now, of course, temptation will be with you right up to the moment of the crucifixion, as it was with the Master. You will remember that even Christ Jesus was faced with temptation after temptation, and we are told of him that Satan left him for a season. Yes, for a while, but it usually came back again. There were the three temptations, and there were many other temptations along his path. But they were temptations to accept appearances as reality. For instance, in the temptation to turn stone into bread, the temptation wasn't to turn stone into bread. The temptation was to believe the appearance of lack and limitation. Had he accepted the appearance of lack and limitation, naturally he would have fallen for the temptation to turn stone into bread. He was tempted to seek, let us say, glory, reputation, name, fame. But actually, the temptation was to believe in the appearance of incompleteness. As if he wasn't already full and complete with the fullness of God, the temptation was to go out and get something that he didn't already have, and that was recognition, reward, fame, name. That was the temptation. But he recognized that while there may have been the appearance of a little man named Jesus, Yeshua, a little unknown or very little known Hebrew rabbi, yet one with a vast mission and vast message, so he may have been tempted to believe that he could go out into the world and gain name and fame and probably establish his message and mission in a wider area. That was the appearance. But it didn't fool him. He knew that if there was a message and a mission, it was the message and mission of God, of which he was but the instrument. And so there was no use of him going out to seek name or fame that after he got it couldn't be his anyhow. It would only be God's, and he would be usurping it falsely. And so he resisted the temptation to accept the appearance. In the case of Lazarus, he was tempted also. Was he tempted to believe that Lazarus was dead? No, that wasn't the temptation. That was the appearance. The temptation was to believe that there was a life apart from God. The appearance, the dead Lazarus, testified to a life apart from God, a life that could end. Had he attempted to change the appearance, he would have been as badly fooled as we if we attempt to heal somebody's diseases. Now, his temptation was to believe that there was a life apart from God. And as soon as he resisted that temptation, the appearance changed of its own accord. So with us, the patient or student may be thousands of miles away from us, and they send us word of an appearance of sin, disease, false appetite, death itself. If we immediately fall for that temptation and try to change the appearance, it will be the blind leading the blind, and both will fall into the ditch. But if we recognize that the picture that has been presented to us is an appearance, and the temptation is to believe in a selfhood apart from God, a life apart from God, a body apart from God. No, you're not. Your body is the temple of the living God. Whether that body appeared to Jesus 2,000 years ago or your body appears to me today, it is the body of God, because ye have no other body. Your body is the temple of God. Now then, even up to the state of consciousness that we call a metaphysical or spiritual practitioner or teacher, remember that you are faced with temptations every day in the week. Never believe that you have risen so high as to be beyond temptation, because then you will be in trouble. Then you'll be up there with the absolutists, talking about the allness of God and demonstrating a lot of discords and inharmonies. You must recognize that even if you have attained the understanding of Jesus Christ, you will be faced with temptation. The temptation to believe in the sickness and death and sins of your patients and students. And finally, you'll be tempted with your own death. Do you remember what they said? Others he could help, but not himself. You see, as long as the temptation was about the other fellow's discords, it seems easy to meet it. But when the temptation comes to believe in some appearance that affects your own life, your own body, your own wealth, then you too may have to call on the 12 disciples and say, "Can ye not stay awake with me 1 hour?" Then you too may be called upon to call on your practitioner friends or teacher friends to stand by with you while you are going through this temptation. That is why I am saying to our serious students, hurry up there. Study harder, practice more, and begin to get on my team. And remember that the more books and pamphlets and recordings on the message of the infinite way that go out into the world, the more will be the call for healings. And the infinite way needs every worker that can learn that in the inspired state of consciousness there is but one presence and one power, one life, one mind, but who also recognizes that every day we are being faced with temptations to believe in appearances. Every day we will see cart tracks come together as long as cart tracks remain on the ground. Every day we will be called upon to look at some snake or other and realize that there is the cord, the rope. Every day we will be faced with a temptation to accept an appearance, and it is up to us to face that appearance, rise higher in consciousness than human sense, and spiritually become aware, through the grace of God, of the spiritual truth of being. Now, in this higher consciousness, you will no longer have a sick person made well, an unemployed person employed, or a dying person made alive. You, through recognizing the appearance to be a temptation to believe in a selfhood activity or law apart from God, will be given the grace to behold that new creature, Christ. You see, the Master could never have acknowledged that Lazarus died and then raised him. The Master had to look through the appearance of a corpse to the Christ that was never born and that could never die. So with us, every appearance is an attempt, is a temptation to believe in a discordant condition or person and in some mode or means of practice that will make them well, harmonious, joyous, employed. Do not fall for the temptation to believe that a well person, a healthy person, or a wealthy person necessarily represents a state of spiritual consciousness. Please do not be satisfied with good health or good supply. Rather, be more alert when you see good health and good supply to ask yourself, is this just nice humanhood, or is this the result or manifestation of spiritual consciousness? Never be satisfied that just because the fever has gone down to the normal temperature, or the lump has gone down and disappeared, or the pain has disappeared, don't be satisfied with that. Don't be satisfied just because your income or your patient's or student's income is meeting their needs and leaving something above. Don't be satisfied that that is spiritual demonstration. You may be accepting a good appearance. Now then, when you no longer concern yourself with the bad appearance or the good appearance, and hold within yourself the truth about Christ, the spiritual identity, then are you practicing the infinite way. Then have you risen above metaphysics into the realm of spiritual wisdom, or spiritual awareness, or the consciousness of God manifest as individual being. I behold myself appearing as infinite form and variety. Now you see, that has nothing to do with beholding sick people and abracadabra making them well, reading a book and making them well. That has to do with a realization of divine consciousness that I, God, behold myself in infinite form and variety. Behold myself appearing as infinite form and variety. Too many students are trying to practice the presence of God in the abstract. they hold some kind of an imaginary thought about the presence of God, not realizing that when they look out at this universe, they are beholding the very life of God appearing as the life of man, appearing as the life of the animal world, vegetable world, mineral world. There is only one life. There's only one life. There's only one law. There's only one spirit. But the Word is always made flesh. The Spirit is always made visible, tangible, manifest. Now, if you are practicing the presence of God and have had a tendency to do it in the abstract, please learn to look out upon your fellow men and realize that unseen to the physical eye, right there is the life of God made manifest. Learn to look out at the sun, the moon, the stars, at the plants, at the trees, at the mountains and valleys, rivers and oceans, the fish in the sea, and realize that right there, even though invisible to human sight, right there is the life of God, the soul of God, made manifest, expressed. That is recognizing the presence of God. That is practicing the presence of God. How wonderful to practice the presence of God through the scriptural words. The heavens declare the glory of God. The earth showeth forth his handiwork. The earth. And do you remember this one? The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, and all the people that are therein. That really means that the life of everybody you meet is God. God is the life of everybody you meet. God is the life of every flower you behold. When the flower seems to wither and die, nothing has touched the life of it. The life is still there and will instantly reappear. And so it is. It may appear that your life disappears, withers, fades, or some relative or friend, patient, student. That is accepting appearances. That life which is God, which is the life of your student, of your patient, of your relative, your friend, that life is God. Now, practice the presence of God, but remember that in doing so, you will be faced with appearances. And some of those appearances will testify to evil, and some will testify to good, but do not accept any appearance. Go behind the appearance through your soul faculties, and there behold that which is there. You will notice in the March 1954 letter a section on prayer. And you will notice that prayer is an exercise of the soul faculties. It isn't an intellectual statement that God is love. It is a divine apprehension that God is love. It is not a statement that God is life. Prayer is a divine apprehension that God is life. It's an actual witnessing of it. That's what prayer is. And nobody prays, really, until their prayer reaches that state of elevation which enables them to see through the appearance, to behold that which is actually there. While this is going on, I would like to call your attention to something that has disturbed students throughout all the years, and which they now must understand. This quotation is from a Persian mystic, Inyat Khan. He says, out of the shell of the broken heart arises the newborn soul. You see, while we are humanly healthy and wealthy and happily married and have nice children, we have no incentive to rise, no incentive to do anything but be happy with our human surroundings. And so very often it takes the shell of a broken heart. It takes a heart breaking out of its shell to force us into higher vision. But then there is another interpretation of the same quotation. A seed planted in the ground has no value until the seed breaks open and the little shoot comes through. If you will watch nature, you will note that every form changes, and out of each form a higher demonstration comes. In other words, out of the broken seed comes the root and the shoot, and then comes a piece of broken ground for the shoot to come through. The shoot breaks through the ground, but notice how later a blossom appears. But out of the broken or faded blossom comes the fruit. Always one form yields. The worm gives up and becomes a something or other in a cocoon. And the cocoon breaks open, and whatever it was that was a worm emerges as a butterfly. And we haven't yet seen, with our human eye, what a butterfly emerges into. Out of the seed comes a baby, through what is often the pain, the distress of the mother. But the little baby form breaks too in order to become a child form, and it breaks to become an adult form. All forms change. All forms yield themselves in order that something higher and better evolve. And so there have been forms of religion that you may have known, and they have been broken now, and out of the shell of that old orthodox religion you found yourself into the higher realm of metaphysics. And now you are breaking through the shell of metaphysics, of right thinking and wrong thinking, of the power of thought, into the higher realm of spiritual wisdom, the atmosphere of God, in which you will find no sin, no disease, not even the temptation to believe in them. Never fear the pains that we, even spiritually, know as growing pains. Never accept these as evil. Always accept them as the breaking shell out of which will come your higher and newer consciousness, always externalizing itself in more perfect and ultimately spiritual forms. Isn't it good to be alive, even on a rainy day in Hawaii? Aloha, aloha. This is Joel.